Character pieces and grotesqueries.
Mm.
No shortage of difficulties in this volume. Has this, as a whole, been the most challenging or one of the most challenging discs to record in your Alkan project so far?
You know, the Grand Sonate is not easy, nor is the Symphonie or the Marche Triomphale. I mean, more or less every disc, there's always been something that's a bit of a worry, and you think, oh, I suppose there is a lot on this disc that is a challenge. And I was okay. I think I did it in a day, the rest of it. And I remember my producer saying, this has to be the most difficult program you've ever played. And I didn't really think about it. I suppose looking back it was, but when you're doing it, you just get on and do it. Yes, I suppose it is. Yes, because there's a lot of stuff there. And it's always much harder, I find anyway, to prepare either a recital program or a CD where it is lots of smaller pieces. It's much easier when you have big chunks. Somehow it takes less mental energy, I think, because, and I found this writing the notes recently, is each one I've had a lot to say about, and it's taken me so much longer. So yes, I suppose you are right. It is now I think about it.
So you've come around. I certainly agree. When you have a series of shorter works that don't necessarily have anything to do with one another, you start from square one each time, and each one has its own difficulties, and you're not repeating large sections. So I think that makes sense that this takes a special kind of energy to prepare a list like this.
Yes, and it's the very distinct characters of each work, and it's getting into that, especially when you're going to the studio. It's knowing that you tap into the psychology of each small work you're playing, and that can be very hard to do. So the order in which I record things is quite important, because I know, and also physically, if you leave all the difficult stuff to the end, bad idea. And don't put it all in a chunk, pace it out. So there's lots of considerations like that, musical and simply physical.
And there's a huge range, I think, representing Alkan's huge range of imagination in this track list here. So you call them character pieces and grotesqueries. The grotesque, the fantastic style, this was a broader artistic trend in the 19th century, especially in France. What is Alkan's unique brand of grotesquerie?
Well, I chose that word in this title as a nod to Raymond Lewenthal, because of course in his funeral march for Papagallo and other grotesqueries of Alkan, he included some of these pieces, and I just think it works. In terms of the grotesque, well, certainly, the two caprices. Well, there's one caprice, Opus 50, the Capriccio, and then there's the Esquisse, Opus 50 bis, Le Tombeau Batauchon. Certainly, it's there. It's certainly in Jean qui rit, Jean qui pleure. Not so much Jean qui rit. The Fantastiquerie, they are also very odd works, and the Trois Petites Fantaisies as well, gargoyle-like. there's something, beneath the surface, there's something odd about it all.
I want to hone in on Jean qui pleure et Jean qui rit because these are, particularly Jean qui rit, this is a first recording, and once you get to know it, you know why. This gave you some trouble. It would give anyone some trouble to play this outright. So I want to start just by the title. These are two Fugue de Camera, Jean qui pleure, Jean qui rit. That's sort of a strange title, Jean who laughs and Jean who cries. What is Alkan referring to here? Do we know?
He's almost certainly referring to a poem written by Voltaire in 1772. The poem is called Jean qui rit et qui pleure. And it's a little piece that addresses the human condition in which an individual can be, depressed in the morning and ready to go merrymaking in the evening. So it's the two sides of the human being. Someone else has postulated another theory, that there is a song of the same title, and I think it's also from the 18th century. I can't remember what that is. It's in one of the essays in the Fayard book. But I am convinced that Voltaire is the inspiration, because on the last stanza there is reference to Héraclite et Démocrite. And of course, he wrote an esquisse, the 39th of the 48 esquisses or motif, is entitled Héraclite et Démocrite, the laughing and crying philosophers. So that can't be accidental. I think it's just too coincidental. It's too extraordinary to be a coincidence.
There's also an illustration I saw when just Googling the phrase. It pops up from 1848, half a face crying, half a face laughing. Have you seen this?
Yes, I have. It's a sort of Janus type, the two-faced god. It's existed in the psyche for a long time, this idea, clearly. But where did he specifically hear about it? I personally think it must be the Voltaire. I have also read elsewhere that Voltaire's poem gave rise to the idiom "c'est Jean qui pleure et Jean qui rit," which at one point was an idiom in French. It is no more. I don't think it's ever used now. So, which means basically swings and roundabouts. It's there are positives and disadvantages. So I'm sure, and also this is the first piece that attests his penchant for opposites. The only other thing is the trois grandes études, left hand, right hand, and then united. But this, in terms of a set of character pieces, this is the first one.
So we have a fugue that cries, sort of a somber fugue, more Bachian in style, and then a Mozartian fugue, well, not a fugue that Mozart would write, but based on a Mozart theme. And of course, Jean is crying in the first fugue, but it's the pianist who is crying in the second, because this almost doesn't seem like it was meant to be played at the keyboard, or maybe it's entirely theoretical. What do you make of that?
You're right there. I think it's much more theoretical, and I have a hunch that the term da camera, it came to mean something a bit more figurative later on. It was, as you know, used to differentiate between music for the chamber and music for the church, and I think much along the same lines as the art of fugue. it's a lot more conceptual, and I think it's just been fitted in. I mean, of course, the title page does say "Due fughe da camera per piani," so we can't refute that. But it's the entire lack of dynamics, except for the last two pages of Grotesqueries, where we just suddenly have a fortissimo, and then there's a forte fortissimo at the end, and that's your lot. So there's that job to do, and the only other work that does that is Opus 15, of course, where there are no expression marks or dynamic marks. So yes, I think it borders on the conceptual. It's where is it? My mind. 3 pages from the end, there is a pedal note, which is just impossible to sustain. There's nothing you can do, and it's sustained for about 8 bars, and it's all tight. You can't do it. And of course, towards the end of that 3rd page to the last, there are stretches that not even the broadest palm, I think, can reach. So you just have to negotiate it. You've got to find a clever way of sorting it out. I think I managed, but it did take a lot of thinking hard about, and also, you know, when you're studying a thing like this, it is rather dry at times, and you. This is why I took my time over it, because I thought I can't just spend 2 months entirely on this and something else. So I think I started it around the time we were all in lockdown. I thought, well, I've got to do something. And this was one of the things and the best thing you can do with any difficult piece is, you learn it first, leave it, go back, and then things readjust and stuff somehow aligns and it starts to work. So that was my journey with them, and I think you're absolutely right. It's much more theoretical. Hence why the second one has never been recorded. I'm sure you've noticed this. What do you notice about the very ending? Near the very end. You spotted something unusual about it.
You mean the final several bars or the coda as a whole?
Yeah, the very end of the coda, just before the closing chords.
So this octave passage,
Yeah, end of the octave passage.
quite a large. Oh my goodness.
Well, I
um,
mean, you
this
C8, top C,
yeah. Well,
which didn't come until, I mean, 35 years later. And it's very odd, you see, because I've added in notes before where he clearly needed them, and he's just missed them out. I can't remember right now where it was, but there were a couple where clearly it's restricted compass, so it's he just there's a missing top note, and there he chooses to write a top C8, which those last 3 notes didn't come. I think it was 1875. Around then, that was the earliest when piano manufacturers. I haven't been able to. I'm sure someone clever can verify this, but it's a good 30 years until that came, and he chose to write in a note that, again, the theoretical.
So this is 1840, is that right?
1840.
And someone reading this in 1840 might laugh out loud at the idea of that note.
Yes, it's very strange. Even that the publisher agreed to it. But it's curious. Usually he eschews such things and writes a sort of pale compromise. And actually, I think there is a MIDI file of it or something like it being played, and it does not, you can't hear it. So it has to be slowed right down. I think that's the whole point of it in a weird way. And actually, it does. I mean, when I did have it under my fingers and I played it through, I thought, well, yes, it does work. It's just too much effort to feel comfortable with something that's musically it's interesting, but there's a reason why certain repertoire is played and certain repertoire is not played, even if the stuff that's still not played is good. It's because it's not always, and we like to have easy lives sometimes as pianists. Mind you, I look at some of the programs I've played before and I think, what was I thinking?
Quasata. This is, to me, a thrill ride of a piece, and it's evaded recording until, I believe, Lloyd Buck about a decade ago, and now it gets its second recording finally. This is really quite a highlight of a piece, and I think it's a shame that it hasn't gotten enough attention.
Yes, you're right. Though there is something about it, there's something slightly wrong with it. And I've tried to put my finger on what it is, and I've never quite been sure. I think it's because it's not terribly memorable. It's very clever, it's well written, it's beautifully written, in fact, and it's exciting, it's got everything there, but the themes just aren't particularly gripping. The best part of it really is the coda, which is truly thrilling to play. Suddenly it really takes off there. But I just find it, I think there's a certain dryness to the conception. It's the main theme that I just don't think is entirely strong enough. If it had been, it would be played a lot more than it is, because I think it's only Lloyd and me who play it. I don't know of anyone else who does. But yes, it is a good piece. It is a good piece. I think if it's just, delivered with panache, yeah, it's good. But there's a reason why it's taken this long, and I think it's because it's not terribly strong melodically.
My favorite is the brief appearance of the whole tone scale near the second half of the piece, where it's a scale we associate with the Impressionists and Debussy. Of course, it's used in a very romantic way of Alkan's time, but it's just one of those witty little things that Alkan manages to do to change up the reappearance of this theme and make the piece a little bit more exciting and surprising.
Oh yes, yes, that is, yes, it's a very, very weird moment, and I like the way how you put it. He switches off gravity.
Yes, turns off the gravity for a moment. Moving on to Pour Monsieur Gorkhaus, sort of an oddity here, almost like an album transcription written for a friend. What can you tell us about this?
It's single leaf, and it's staves scored freehand. And I think it was just, we have no idea why he wrote it. I don't think we even know who Monsieur Gorkhaus was. But it's very interesting. I've included it because it's not specified for pedal piano. The scoring suggests it is, but he doesn't say that. And it's doable on the piano, and I just thought, well, for good measure. It's a nice little thing. It's a clever little canon, and it really is an earworm.
Moving on to, I wanted to talk about the Opus 75 Toccatina. I believe I read that this was the first piece by Alkan you played. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
it was chosen for
Well,
you?
I did actually play the Song of the Madwoman first, but very, very briefly. And then the choice of piece was changed because the head of department decided I needed something to sink my teeth into a bit more. And of course, I bit off a bit more than I could chew with the Toccatina because it was a little bit beyond me then. I think I was about 13. So it was really quite hard because I didn't have any fingers back then. But I did benefit from it. I remember I had to work tremendously hard. And there are just a few moments in it where, it's not the ideal thing for a young student to be playing. Because there's a lot of passage work that's useful. Then suddenly you're sort of led down a blind alley, and then there's something really quite hard. Yeah, it's a fantastic work. I really do consider it now to be an absolute masterpiece. I think it's so clever, so original. It's again, it's the quiet passage work for over 100 bars, and Ronald Smith described this as like a time bomb ticking over. There's an eeriness to it. Raymond Lowenthal had a much more jovial outlook. He saw it as a sort of fairy dance of elves and pixies. What was it? Fairies and elves, I think that was it. And how droll the middle section is, with a malevolent pixie beating out this ostinato on two buttercup timpanis, which is such a lovely image for that funny A-flat major section. And also the way how that lyrical episode in the middle is suspended over that. There's a flattened seventh, isn't there? In the bass, there are these ninths. And that's really peculiar. And you can't use the pedal. And I remember when I played it to Ronald Smith, I was cheating, and I had to use the pedal because I couldn't do it. He said, I'm not too sure about that. Because, of course, it ruins the staccato. Do you have anything particular
I always think of the end. I forget if it was Smith or Lowenthal who pointed this out, but Alkan has these characteristic slaps at the extremes of the keyboard. But at the end of this, we have the scale passage on both ends, and then just plucks out
Yeah.
middle C, like the extreme opposite of everything he's done to this point. He's doing the inverse now, and ends in
Yes.
such a unique
On
way.
the blinding light of middle C, as Ronald Smith put it. Though, of course, Raymond Lewenthal in his recording rewrites this passage, and he ends on two top Cs going outwards.
Well, there's so much more to discuss on this album. I think the last question, if I may, is just about these two related, at least they share an opus number, half an opus number, opus 50 and opus 50 bis. Capriccio alla soldatesca and La Tambour Bateau Chant. Are these two related works? Are they part of a larger sketch? Do they tell a broader story to you? What is their relationship in your interpretation?
Of course, the language is similar, but they're not related. The Capriccio alla soldatesca is prefaced by some lines of poetry in French. For some reason beyond me, it's been struck off of subsequent issues of the work. So it is not in the Biodo. I don't think it was ever in the old Costola edition. It's certainly in the first edition, which is with Richaud, 1859. And underneath these lines, it says imité de Zedlitz. Now, it means after Zedlitz. So Zedlitz's poem is called Die nächtliche Heerschau, which means the night parade. And in this poem, Zedlitz envisions the nightmare scenario of Napoleon's legions of men whose devotion was legendary and fanatical. He has this vision of them rising from the grave in one final call to arms to avenge their emperor. So, of course, it opens with a drummer rising out the grave, and then a bugler, and then a cavalcade. And, of course, all of this is depicted. So we have those drum strokes at the beginning marked fantasticamente. And then, of course, quasi tromba, pa-pa-pum, 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 pa-pa-pum. And then that quasi cavalcata, the cavalcade of these ghostly hooves, and then conquistadore, all of this. So in the poem, this is what happens, and Napoleon is the last one to get up. He's not called Napoleon by name in the poem, but he's described as small, with a small hat and ordinary clothes, and he whispers the word France and the password St. Helena being where Napoleon died in exile. Of course, everyone, in the middle of the 19th century were terrified that all of this might happen again, because things were quite fraught at this point because of the situation with the French getting involved with the Italian campaign of Napoleon III. And the threat of going to war with Germany was really quite high, and this is why I think Alkan felt some sympathy with this poem and wrote these two pieces. In Zedlitz's work, there's also a reference to scorching earth, snows, Nile mud, Arabian sands, and of course these are all references to the Napoleonic Wars. The lines of poetry above this first edition, they are not a translation, they're simply a paraphrase of Zedlitz's poem, and I think they're probably by Alkan himself. I can't trace them being from anywhere else in particular. So there is a complete and very, I hope, succinct translation of these lines, which I've made but his French poetry can be rather elusive at the best of times. So that's what that's all about. It's much more programmatic. Le Tombeau Bateau Chant, yes, programmatic, but we don't really know the program. It's very clear what's going on. There's this constant ostinato, then there's a skirmish. It returns. We have these world-weary laments with grinding chromatic accompaniment. And then that grand and tragic climax, which is just so extraordinary. Really frightening music, actually. When you look at it, when you're sort of close up against it, and you realize how bare all of it is, he doesn't really use, you couldn't take a note away. There's no excess. That's what I find so amazing. So they are two extraordinary works, and certainly things I would want to go back to in the future.